Tell us like a little bit about, how you and your family got to Israel.
The short version is basically, my father was a World War II vet. He grew up in a Christian home that had a respect for the Jewish people, saw them as God's chosen people. And when he heard that Nazis were killing Jews, it infuriated him, and he felt the need and the calling to go and defend the Jewish people. So at the age of 15, he lied about his age, and he joined the Navy. He ended up in the submarine units, learned electrical engineering as far as occupation through his military experience. And when he got out, he started an electrical company and then got into the building industry in Fort Lauderdale, Miami, and was part of the building boom of all these big projects, hotels, government buildings, etc. And so good friends of his from the war, who were also contractors, were a part of the Sinai Agreement and bringing contractors to Israel from the US to help with the deal that America did with Israel, with giving away the Sinai back to Egypt and all that, part of which was to build military bases based on the American standard, I guess, that are better or what have you. And so they reached out to my dad and said, hey, we need some contractors to come here, electrical engineers like yourself and so on. And they knew he would most likely jump on the opportunity, which he did. And that's what brought us to Israel, is through my dad's contracting work. And that's why I ended up being born in Eilat, because that's where the housing was for the contractors, because a lot of the work was down in the Sinai area.
You're born in Eilat?
Born in Eilat. Wow. And then from there we ended up moving to Kiryat Shmona, where he...
From one extreme to the next.
Yeah, where he met his second wife, because he left his first wife when he came to do the contracting work.
Yeah.
She wasn't an Israel enthusiast like my dad was. And so they basically split based on their different worldviews. And so he met his second wife, who was a Jewish girl from Kiryat Shmona, a young girl who was at the end of her military service. And they met in Herzliya, because that's also where a lot of the business central was.
Wait, so the first wife was your mother?
My mother?
Okay.
No, the first wife is not my mother.
Okay, the second wife was your mother?
The third one is my mom.
Oh, the third one's your mom. Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow.
So when he met her, they bought a house together.
This
in
is the second
Kiryat
one?
Yes.
Okay.
So she was a soldier that basically was I think she was deployed to one of the bases in Herzliya area. I think she was part of the Air Force or something. And so that's why he met some girl from like the backwoods of Israel, because really this is not some central place. Kiryat Shmona is like really, even for Israelis, it's
one of the most northern cities.
It's one of the most northern cities, but it's also, it's kind of like a lot of the South, like Dimona or whatever. Like nobody really, tourism doesn't really go through there per se, and it's not a main city. But in any case, they met in Herzliya. They got a relationship, got married, bought a house together in her hometown. And so he had that home when he met my mom. And like I said, we're living in Eilat in the contractors' facilities. And I guess he got sick of living there, I guess, or whatever, and decided to move the whole family after we were born, my twin and I. And we were about maybe like 1 year old or something, into the home that he bought with his second wife. And that's why we ended up being raised up in the north.
But he wasn't with his second wife?
No, they split, sorry. Okay. Yeah, they split.
Yeah.
She wanted America, he wanted Israel. And after the whole
And the third wife
phase,
was not Jewish?
No,
okay.
So the third wife was Catholic background.
Your mother, yeah.
My mother, yeah. So she was Catholic background, my dad from a Protestant background.
And how was your household Catholic or Protestant? Or just...
Protestant for sure, yeah. So my dad was like he was the main spiritual leader of the home. He was the one that would have Bible studies, read about the biblical importance of Israel. He would always talk about prophecy. That was one of his, how would you say, infatuations, really. I mean, he even wrote a book that was focused on end times, prophecies, and Israel, and what geopolitics, like what nations are going to be involved in these end time scenarios.
The end of times, yeah.
Yeah, the end of times. And he tried to, of course, like a lot of Christians do, they try to interpret who are going to be the players, what countries, what leaders. At the time, they were, this is back in the 70s, so whoever was, the key figures then are highlighted in his book, and of course are no longer relevant because we're now like decades later, and it's different players, different leaders. But that was one of his passions. End times, Israel, how important Israel is for the end times.
Was there a Christian community like in Kiryat Shmona?
No.
So what was it like, a bit lonely, or like what
not
was it?
For me? Yeah, not for me, because I grew up with your traditional Judaism, I guess you can call it, right? What we call Mesorti in Hebrew. Israelis who are Jewish, who are not necessarily Orthodox. They don't necessarily, let's say, wear their tzitzit and kippah throughout the week, but go to the synagogue on the Sabbath, of course, have Shabbat meal, have the whole procedure of the prayers, the blessings and all. But for the rest of the week, you're not necessarily so religious and observant. Of course, eat kosher and all those different things. So that was like my surrounding and my influence of friends and those that I grew up with from a Middle Eastern Edot HaMizrach background.
What was it like growing up in Israel as someone who's not Jewish?
Like, again, I saw myself as Israeli, so I didn't feel different per se. I felt very much, because again, my dad was so pro-Israel, so emphasizing the importance of the Jewish people, that for me it was like, well, we're part of these people. We're part of Israel.
That makes sense.
I never kind of saw myself as different. I just knew, of course, that we had a different belief system, but it wasn't emphasized, right? Because we were so involved in the Jewish community that it really wasn't a big deal, except for Christmas. So my dad would put up a Christmas tree and, of course, put all the lights on and everything. And that was where I realized there was like a difference, because my buddies would say, Doron, please let us know next time you have that tree and the lights. We want to come and see it. It was like, you know what I mean? It was like this highlight of the community that they have this thing where they put up a tree and,
So interesting.
Yeah.
Did you guys get any like pushback from the community or?
No, the opposite. So I had a twin brother who died at 2 years old from a smoke fire.
Oh my God.
And I survived by miracle. My mom and my younger brother survived by miracle, but I literally survived by miracle because I was in the same crib with my twin where the fire started, right? So where we got the most poisoning from the smoke. What happened was my twin brother was about to be buried in Kiryat Shmona cemetery, and the head rabbi Kiryat Shmona said, no, he can't be buried in the Jewish cemetery. He has to be buried separately because of halakha. And the Jewish community actually were very much against the rabbi on that. They're like, what are you doing? They're part of us. They did circumcision, because we literally had the mohel and the ceremony on the 8th day, because that was what my dad requested. And our friends that were like family, they wanted to make sure to cater to that, right? So we had my godfather, we had the whole deal, like you would do in a normal ceremony. So we were circumcised according to halakha, but as non-Jews. And again, it was done, of course, in ignorance we're talking about a community that isn't Orthodox, if you like, and we're meaning well, and saw us as a part of them. So that was kind of the interesting thing and I didn't know this, by the way. I only found this out years later when I went through Jewish conversion with my wife and I. And I remember the folks that helped raise me, they're like my second parents. They're a Moroccan couple. And the wife bitterly says, I'm still not going to forgive that rabbi for what he did. And I said, what are you talking about? Because it's still the same head rabbi. Years later, and he's also the head rabbi of the north at the time. He was the head of the Beit Din, and he's the one that's proceeding over my conversion process. And she says, you know, he did this and this and this. And I was like, well, did he follow halakha? And then I respect him. I took it as like, wow, that's awesome. Like, my brother was the first one to kind of push on a halachic issue in Kiryat Shmona. And for many years, he was the only one who had his own separate tombstone outside of the cemetery, which I thought was actually like a special plot my dad had bought or something. I never knew the nuance.
And this rabbi,
until years later, you had a bunch of non-Jews being buried around him, and it kind of bothered me. I was like, why are these people kind of infringing on my brother's burial site? And then the coin dropped on that day. I was like, oh, so these are basically folks who made Aliyah, but for whatever reasons, ended up halachically being buried outside of the Jewish cemetery.
And that rabbi presided over your
over the conversion for my wife and I years later.
Wow. And so after high school, like after you finished high school in Israel, you didn't go right into the IDF, right? You went to Bible school?
I went to Bible school, yeah. So yeah, I went to a
Christian Bible school.
A Christian Bible school, correct. So I went to pursue Christian studies, and I really wanted to understand why is it that's when I started to really want to study why is it that where I grew up and how I grew up was different than the rest of the Jewish people. Why is Christianity what it is? I wanted to get to the nitty-gritty, to the tachlis. And so went to Bible school, went to go get a bunch of questions answered, and was a little disappointed because I think part of the problem was that I grew up with a Jewish mindset and Jewish world view of religion, that the Christian answers, which are mostly theological, not necessarily halakha, kind of rubbed me wrong, so to speak, right? I was looking for what does God want me to do? Instead, I was told this is what the right way of thinking is. This is the right theology of either this denomination, this group, and you get to choose. And I'm like, but I want to know what you are telling me is the halakha, so to speak, right? And they're just like, well, no, we don't have that. Like, the different professors have different theologies in the same school. And I was like, well, how does that work? I mean, I don't understand. And it just kind of gnawed on me. It wasn't a big deal, but it just was unanswered questions I still had. And then 9/11 happened. So this is back in 2000 when I went to the US. 9/11 happened, and this was the peak of the second Intifada. So bus bombings, discotheques, everything. And I was eaten up inside. Here I am, not doing my military service. I have a 97 profile, it's called, which is basically combat certified. And instead of serving to fight terrorists and the terrorism that is growing in Israel, and then peaking with the terrorism now in America, here I am just studying theology, and it just bothered me. And so right after 9/11, I think, is essentially kind of like the breaking point where I was like, I got to go back home, and I need to get back into the system, and I need to get into combat, and I need to fight these terrorists who are threatening my people, threatening my country, and we'll leave theology studies for later, so to speak, on the back burner.
Yeah.
So I actually didn't finish my degree through those studies.
I definitely want to go into your IDF service because, I mean, you're in Miluim right now, which is reserves, and you've spent a lot of time active, obviously, doing what you're doing, which is fascinating. But basically, you and your wife ended up converting to Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
So what was that like? What was that like? I'm interested to understand emotionally what that is like, as well as like logistically.
Right. So it essentially started with, so I started my military service, and at some point in my military service, one of my soldiers came back from a program called Nativ, and they said, we really think this would fit you. You're a spiritual guy, you're really into spirituality, and we think that this would be really fitting to you.
What is Nativ?
Nativ was a new program that was started about the time that I was in my service, and I think this was in 2004 they started. And what it was is basically a program for a fast track for Jewish conversion for Israeli soldiers. So basically the IDF recognized, and I think it was kind of like a nonprofit, someone from outside the IDF that came into the IDF and basically petitioned and said, it's not right that you have Israeli soldiers who are laying their life down for the state of Israel, but they have another status citizenry as non-Jews, so to speak, right? They can't get married, for example, to another Jewish person if they found the love of their life, and it so happens to be because the mom's not Jewish, well then, but they grew up in a Jewish home, but they're not going to be able to get married, and it's like almost like a discrimination towards someone who literally laid down their life for the state of Israel. And so that argument basically won within the rabbinate, because the rabbinate had to sign off on this, of course, right?
Yeah.
Because they're the ones who certify these conversions. Because in Israel, the only conversion process that's accepted within the Ministry of Interior and citizenry and your status, so to speak, as an Israeli, is the ultra-Orthodox. Or not ultra-Orthodox, I'm not really using the right term, but basically the orthodoxy of Israel, yeah? So conservatives don't work, reforms don't work. If you did a conversion in either one of those streams, that doesn't get accepted. So they agreed to do this special program. It's 6 months long. You get a 2-month taglit, is the best way I can put it, is like a taglit style, touring Israel, learning about Israel, learning about Judaism, learning about the land, the people, the stories, the who, the why, and basically more talking about identity, because not necessarily everybody who's in the program have to do conversion or in need of. It's people who grew up in South Africa and didn't really know much about the Jewish community in Israel, so it's actually also for them as well, right? But they're Jewish, from both sides, and so they're good. They don't need to do the conversion part. So for them, it was that. But then for those who were interested in conversion, then there was another 2 different periods of 2 months where you do a deep dive into Jewish studies and basically get you prepared for the Beit Din that essentially performs the questioning and the see if you're prepared and ready to go through conversion, and then basically sign off on it and
that all happened during your inside of your military.
It happens, yeah.
Your regular service.
Correct. So you'll leave the first two months of the Taglit version fun and a little bit of Jewish studies, and then you let your command know you want to proceed, and then the Nativ course will sign you up for the next 2 months, and then the next 2 months, and then get you prepared for the Beit Din.
How old were you when you were doing that?
I was older, so that was the only part in my military service that was different than everyone else, or most Israeli soldiers, is that I was about 4 years older than most of the guys. I was older than my platoon commander, for example.
Yeah.
And so I was like this oddball older guy, married 3 years already. So I'm also married, older.
Wow.
And so,
which is normal for Jewish Olim Chadashim, but not like a native born
not
Israeli.
A native born Israeli, exactly.
Yeah.
You have the Beinishim, who are usually older guys.
What's that?
Bnei Yeshiva guys.
They go to yeshiva.
They have a special program where they do, I think, a 2-year service.
Yeah.
That they commit to the IDF, but they have to commit, I believe it's like 3 years to a yeshiva that has made a program agreement with the IDF.
You did that in your service, and you converted?
I did it in my service. I started the first 2 months, and then that's when I was convinced that this was the path for my wife and I. And it started with small things like, we're going to keep Shabbat. We're definitely going to eat kosher. I didn't really grow up, like I said, in Kiryat Shmona necessarily eating pork or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not like you had the opportunity. Nobody's selling it up there. That came later with the aliyah from different other countries where they brought some of those customs. But yeah, it's like I made those decisions. I'm going to keep biblical kosher. I'm going to try to be honoring of the Shabbat. not driving, not making fires, cooking, whatever, all the different observances on a very basic level. And we started with that. And then after the military service, we decided to take a year off from everything and just do a deep dive into Jewish studies. I want to really understand what I'm taking upon myself. What are the commandments? What does it mean, this covenant I'm about to take on myself, if I'm going to really proceed with this?
Where were you guys?
Because I didn't want to half-heartedly do it just for the stamp, because we didn't need it for my wife and I. You know, we're already Israeli citizens, and we're already, you know, we didn't need the status for status sake and whatnot.
Where was your wife from?
She was from Sweden. So my wife is born and raised in Sweden. She grew up in a Christian Pentecostal home. Her dad was a Christian leader in Sweden, who was also, ironically, also like my father, very Zionist. He was the Swedish representative of the Christian embassy here in Jerusalem, and part of that whole crowd of Christian leaders who came together to basically recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and knowing that the other nations were not moving their embassies to Jerusalem. So the Christians said, as the Christian voice from all these countries, we're going to have the Christian embassy that represents us.
Makes sense.
And hopefully influence our nations to do the same and follow suit. So he was actually the Swedish representative of the Christian embassy and one of the founders of that.
Where were you guys living?
We were living in the Golan. So
wow.
So we were living in the Golan during my military service. And that's why also the process of our conversion continued into the non-Nativ course, but the civilian version, the longer version, and went to the people that basically cater and run that, right? They have the courses. Most of the people are working, right? So you have like night meetings where you take classes and do a deep dive into Jewish studies, and they help you and they coach you. But again, we already took a year off from everything and did our own deep dive, and then we joined the course already kind of armed to the teeth with knowledge, and so we actually, even though we took the civilian version because my wife wasn't a soldier, so we couldn't do it because of her not being a soldier, it went very quickly for us because they saw that we were already ahead of most all the other people that were studying and whatnot.
How was your wife's integration in Israel coming from? She was coming from Sweden, or you met her?
She came from Sweden, correct. So we met in Israel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we met in Israel. Her father moved here, moved the family here because he was writing for a Christian publication in the U.S., writing about Israel and so on, reporting and basically helping Christian Zionism, if you like, and helping educate Christians around the world, but mainly in the United States, from this publication about what's happening in Israel politically, what can we do to help basically further the Zionist cause in the land of Israel, and stuff like that. So that's what brought them here. And today he has his own publication that he writes and does more or less the same thing.
Wow. So what did it feel like when you converted?
For me, it wasn't, I mean, it was a big deal, of course, but it was more like, it felt to me like I was basically embracing my destiny, I guess is a good way to put it. It's like I never, like I said, growing up here, I never felt separate or different from the rest of Israelis. More so, I felt like we had the same worldviews, the same passions about God, Israel. The group of people I would connect with were typically Zionist Israelis, not from, let's say, the left-leaning politics or socialism. I never connected with those groups. Because again, Israel is a very multicultural, just so whoever's listening, it's, my sphere of what I'm talking about is just one slice of Israeli society, but that's who I kind of connected with more, and so it was just felt like I was being part of the Shivat Zion, right? Rav Kook, establishing the land, building the land, bringing the land back to life. You know, it's that movement of Judaism and the Jewish people, or Israel, right? They are from that part of the world, so to speak. And so, yeah, it just felt like I was connecting with that and being part of that and embracing my destiny, so to speak, of being part of this movement that's bigger than me.
Did you guys have kids when you guys did this?
No, we were not able to have kids for 10 years. So we're married 25 years now. So for 10 years, we weren't able to have kids. And after the conversion process, about maybe 3 years later, give or take, we had our first child.
Wow.
So all our kids were born into our post-conversion process. And
they don't have to convert, no?
No.
Okay. Wow.
So they grew up basically in a Torah observant home, versus what my wife and I were beforehand. And
was there like a final ceremony? Did you guys finish at the same time?
Yeah, you always, the whole process, if you're married, is together. Yeah. The whole point of the rabbi's process of making sure that both sides, both parties are in agreement. Both sides are it's not like the one is saying, I want to be more, I'm really the one pulling in this relationship towards the conversion. The other one's kind of like, cold feet, whatever. They want to make sure that both of you are in full agreement, which we were. Thankfully, we were. The both of us were very much in agreement with that. And then the final process is what's called a mikveh, or the Christian world knows as baptism. And it's actually where baptism in the Christian world comes from, right? Is the Jewish practice of mikveh.
I figured that, yeah.
Yeah, and mikveh is different. If there's anybody who's Christian listening, there's different versions of baptism. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So you have for for women who have their monthly cycle, and when they want to reunite with their spouses, they go through a mikveh. And they become ritually pure, and then they can the couple can reunite. If you want to go up on the Temple Mount and you want to go ascend Mount Zion, you go through a mikveh for ritual purity to go up and then in this process, which is I think where a lot of the Christian version of it came from, is the conversion, which is essentially you go into the mikveh and you die to the person you were.
You also go?
Yeah.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
I thought it was just women.
No. Both parties.
Wow.
Both. Yeah. So the person who's going through the conversion process, male or female, you go into the mikveh, and you're going in naked, because the concept is essentially you're going in as a child, like you came into the world naked, right?
Yeah.
So you're going in. Without any, because of the halacha, you're not supposed to have like a ring or anything touching you.
Yeah, you got to go
full on. There's a whole process. We won't get into the nitty gritty. Chopping your nails or whatever.
Wait, you had to do that too?
Well, I mean, you have to, but it's less stringent with guys. Yes.
Right. For women, when they go to the mikveh, they have a whole process.
They make it more stringent. Correct.
It's not.
Correct.
For the conversion process, you had to.
Oh yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah. I mean, again, I made sure that I wanted to, cross all my T's and dot all my I's.
I understand. Yeah.
So I was all in, and so the idea is you're going in as whoever you were, and you're dying to that person. That person is no longer who went into the water, is no longer that person. When you come out, you're born again, right?
That's so funny because it sounds like a baptism.
It sounds like a baptism in Christian world, right? They call it born again. But that concept comes from Judaism, right? Is essentially because, in other words, you're a new creation, right? And the rabbis explain that technically, if you like, right, both a brother and a sister could go into a mikveh, right, and through conversion, come out and technically could marry, because you're technically no longer siblings anymore, right? You're a new creation altogether. Wow. Again, this is just conceptually speaking, nobody ever does that.
Right.
But that's how powerful of a new person you are. So that's also why you pick a new name. You have to actually, they tell you have to pick a new identity or a new name. You're no longer who you were.
Doron's not your first name?
It's not my birth name, no.
Wow.
No. So that was something that I had to choose, right? I had to choose a new name.
Wow.
And the same with my wife, of course.
You guys were in like your mid-20s?
We were in our mid-20s, yeah. And
Where was
in our late 20s, actually.
Where was the mikveh? Like, where did you?
In Kiryat Shmona.
In Kiryat Shmona,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when you came out, what was it like?
It just was cool because it just, there was so much build up, so much spiritual preparedness, I guess you could say, where I was really wanting to make sure that I was fully embracing this moment.
Wow.
And this procedure, right? And just the weight of it, that understanding, like I just said, I'm a new creation, and I am now a Jew who is now responsible to all of the commandments, and especially the ones for males, because there's different commandments for males, women, priests, Levites, etc. But that I was like, I'm now going to embrace this fully, and now I'm really, really going to have to be responsible, because before the conversion, you're not. They even will tell you, like, you shouldn't keep the Sabbath all the way, you shouldn't keep the halakha all the way, you need to, that's for later, so to speak, right? Because right now you're not required to as a Gentile. And so it was a big deal. It was a real big deal. And it was also very emotional, because understanding of the rabbi who was doing this procedure was the same one who made this halachic decision with my twin brother, and the impact it made on the Jewish community of Kiryat Shmona and their sentiments negatively, unfortunately, towards him, and me feeling like I'm embracing this man's decision. I'm embracing the halakha of the sages, right? That their decisions, their influence on us as the Jewish people is so much greater and bigger than us, that it's such a privilege to just, like, now you're now fully under this, right? You're fully under this authority and the people of Israel. And now I have a huge responsibility, not just for myself, but also to the rest of the world, right? As how I live my life. I can't slackadox it, so to speak, right? Although I would say that most of my Jewish observance is what I would consider is slackadox, because I'm not ultra-Orthodox in my observance, but I am definitely Orthodox. That's what I'm aiming towards, is orthodoxy in my observance and in how I'm teaching my children.
Wow.
And so on. So,
you still close with that rabbi?
No, because distance and where I live now and where he lives.
Yeah.
But
it's quite a full circle.
Yeah, and it's such a cool honor too, right? It's like the very man that made this decision with my brother, my twin, decades beforehand, is also the one who's kind of, and he even told me, he said, he was very emotional himself, and he says, this was, this is a big deal. He says, do you realize your father tried to go through conversion, but essentially because of your mother, it didn't come through. Basically, he was the one, like I was saying, was more enthusiastic about the Jewish world and whatnot, and so that I didn't know either. I'd never been told that.
Wow.
Because we eventually, my younger brother and I ended up in foster care, and so we didn't really know much after the age of, I was about 13 when I ended up in foster care. I didn't know much about my family history or...
Really?
Yeah.
How did you end up in foster care at 13?
Because of the fire in our home.
Yeah.
The smoke fire that killed my younger twin brother, right? I was the oldest out of the two. A few minutes, I guess. What happened is that kind of broke up our family, and my father ended up becoming an alcoholic. My mother ended up institutionalized. My father was usually in a drunken stupor at home. There was no home, basically, right? And so the social care came in, and we're like, this is a train wreck. We need to help you guys. And eventually they found a home for us in Haifa. And I ended up being raised in foster care until I got married.
With the same family?
With the same family, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was the same couple.
And what happened with your father and your mother? They're still alive, or?
No. So my father and mother ended up eventually going back to their families in the U.S. because their families figured out that something was not really totally squared away here with them, and because they didn't know the extent of how bad things were. They knew that because of my twin brother's death, that my dad wasn't in the best place, and his relationship with his wife was not really going very well because she was constantly in and out of the mental institution. And so eventually one of the family members came over here and started to look into the matter and figure out what was happening, because this is before emails and text messaging, you know. It was mostly through trying to get through on the phone. If there's no one answering on the other end, well, you just get over here and, you know, show up and be like, hey, what's going on? And that's what essentially happened. And so my father got taken to his family, and they took care of him, put him in an institution for people who were addicts. And so he had to be put on meds and all that kind of thing. And then my mom she went to her family. And essentially she was the first one that died out of the two, even though she was much younger than my dad. She died from Legionnaires, and my father died, he had Alzheimer's, and eventually his body gave out from all the alcohol and abuse.
Wow. And
he died shortly after her. So.
Wow. And you guys were left in Israel?
And we were left in foster care the whole time, yeah. So she died while I was still in foster care, just before I got married. And my father died shortly after I'd gotten married and moved to the U.S., which is part of the reason why I put my military service on the back burner, because I explained to the military, I said, look, my mom had just passed away. My dad is at the end of his life, basically, and I want to show my last respects and help with his taking care. And so I actually chose a Bible school that was close to where my dad was being in the institution that he was put in. And the old folks, it's like an old folks home, but again with assisted living of a sort, if you like I said, with different meds and everything for his condition. And that's what I did, is I basically helped till I saw that I was not basically needed anymore, and made it back to Israel.
The foster family was Christian or Jewish?
So the foster family actually were from a Christian background.
Okay.
They were a Christian background. The father grew up in a Christian home, and he was basically he was somebody who was part of the performing arts, movies, stage plays, all that in America. He was the professor, eventually became the professor of the performing arts in Fordham University. Did stage plays, did some acting, Anthony Hopkins, people like that. And also help find the talent find, I guess, I don't know however you call it, but essentially got Denzel Washington on his way, who eventually becomes this top A-lister actor in Hollywood years later. And that was kind of like the peak of his career. And then he ended up having a powerful encounter with God, and because he was in a bad place, even though he had all these accolades. He was an alcoholic. He was doing the whole like Hollywood kind of lifestyle, so to speak, of just not really having any real direction in his life or meaning, I guess you could say, spiritually speaking. And that's where he had this big experience and stopped. He cut the drinking. He got more into his faith. And essentially, he got very involved with a ministry in Times Square Church, it's called, under David Wilkerson, who is a very, very big evangelical preacher at the time. He's no longer with us, but he's very well known in the evangelical world. And one of his main foundations is a drug and alcohol rehab, because he was basically a preacher from the country who moved to New York City to help combat drugs and alcohol in the inner city of New York. And so my foster dad, David Davis, he got very much connected with that, and I guess also with his background with with alcohol abuse mainly. And then he decided, together with his wife, who grew up in a Jewish home, but she became a Christian. So the both of them felt that it was important to come to Israel and to fight against the drug and alcohol pandemic that was that they were shocked to discover was happening here in Israel in the 90s when they first came here as a new couple. It was like their honeymoon visit, and they were shocked to come to the old city of Jerusalem and to discover that there were people who were drug addicts. They're like, what? There's like a drug pandemic here? It's like, yeah, there's terrorism, there's wars, and people are getting into drugs because to cope or whatever. And because it's like this naive Christian view of the Holy Land, that there's no crime, violence, whatever. It's the Holy Land, And so that kind of was this aha moment of like, oh, okay, like there's real people here, there's real problems here, just like we have in the West. And so they came and started a drug and alcohol rehab. And so friends of my family that knew that we were having our struggle reached out to them, but they're like, we're drug and alcohol rehab. Like, we're not, we don't take kids. And so they actually made an exception and took us first into the rehab. And so we had our own room, my brother and I. We had our own separate living, but we did everything with the drug and alcohol addicts. So we did chores with them, if it was kitchen duty, cleaning the floors, the bathrooms, the whatever, like, because they would have chores to kind of put discipline and order into their lives as part of the rehab. So we would join into that as these young kids and be part of that program, and had some very interesting conversations. I mean, something that most kids, I don't think, really got to experience.
Where's your younger brother?
He's still living in Haifa, where we end up in foster care. So.
Wow. And did he convert to Judaism, or he's so?
No.
Interesting.
So my brother never was drawn to Judaism like I was.
Gotcha.
He remained happily in the way God created him.
Gotcha. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
It's hard to go from that to the war, but you have spent over 300 days in Miluim and reserve duty and fighting this war. It's quite a big leap, but maybe you can get into what it's been like, and how you got into your unit, what you guys do.
So I ended up eventually, after my military service, I ended up stationed in the Northern Command, and basically did all my reserve duty from 2006 up to 2014, the last Gaza war. In 2014, the big Gaza war that we had before the current one. And so spent many years basically patrolling the northern border.
Because you lived there, right?
No, it just is the way. It's just the way I ended up in the military pool of.
And this was after, like, you finished your Keva,
the mandatory service.
But you finished in the unit that you're currently in?
No.
Right. Okay.
So essentially, after the last Gaza war in 2014, that was my last deployment with the battalion that I was a part of, and I was a commander there, sergeant, and all that, and did all the operations up there against Hezbollah and the main focus threat from the north and all that. And eventually, what happened was I got released from reserve duty. I got my paper saying you no longer have to do reserve duty.
Because of your age?
I guess because of the age, and I think actually it was part of because I didn't reach the age yet, but I think what was happening, and I talked to a lot of guys that had this happen to them too, it's like the military was downsizing, and so they were actually cutting off people.
Wow.
Which is crazy, because it's also part of what led to a lot of the blunders of October 7th, so to speak. Not blunders, but essentially we had less manpower, right, to throw at the enemy. So we had a lot of people who had a combat background like myself, went to commander course or an NCO course, so with commanding skills. Basically somebody has all of what is needed to fight terrorists, to fight a threat on the homeland, and we're sitting at home. We're not deployed. We're not,
What age did they cut you out?
Back then I was, 34 maybe?
What age, is it 40 that they
I think it's 40 is the cutoff,
They cut you out 30. Wow.
And so of course I was very disappointed because I'm very committed to the defense of Israel. It's kind of been my passion.
Yeah.
And so one of my friends that I met through my security work asked me, hey, what unit are you in? And I said, I'm in no unit right now. I said, I literally got cut out of the system. And he's like, you got to be kidding me. He's like, with all of your talents and everything? I said, yeah, man. I was like, do you have any ideas? And so he says, well, there's this really, really hardcore unit that I'm in right now. And I was like, well, what's the unit? He's like, well, I can't tell you much about it, but basically in general terms, this is what we do. I said, okay, like quit messing with me. How do I get into the unit? And he says, well, you have to meet with the commander, like go through an interview with the commander. And then you can start, if he accepts you, then you go through a tryout phase, and then eventually you join the unit. You're part of the unit. So I did that. I met with the commander. He green-lighted me to join them on their training Miluim detail. And that was in 2017. So in 2017 is when I joined this, and it was a big transition because I went from your grunt battalion fighting, knuckle draggers to special forces, smaller teams, different types of resources, better night vision, better vehicles, better everything, right? And then everybody's on the same mindset as I was. We're all security experts in our day-to-day life. We didn't just do miluim, our reserve duty when it called, and then went back to accounting.
Gotcha.
We had shooting instructors, guys who came from one of the most elite special forces units in the military, different backgrounds and whatnot. Some real legendary guys too themselves, as far as they were part of the founding of some of the most amazing units today. And we're all about the same age. We're all in our late 40s now, but at the time, however old we all were back then. So basically with over 20 years of experience, most of us, right? And it was just such a great experience because for me, that was one of my biggest discouragements of constantly trying to get into those kind of units. But when I started my military service, because of my religious status, I actually was barred from even trying out for Special Forces. And that really disappointed me because I knew that I was not of the mentality of your normal grunt guys of, sure, I'll just do the bare minimum. I was like, no, I want to do the maximum right. Service, maximum, and everything. Right. And so we're in a unit where we're all on the same page. We all have the same mindset. We're all trying to push to the maximum of our output. And it just created a working environment of actual professionals. And it's something that the military also paid attention to. And so this was under the 98th Fire Battalion, as it's translated in English, which is a very, very elite division of the military, which is basically reservists, but it's technically a enlisted battalion, right? Of the commando unit is in that unit, for example, and other different units. I can't really give too much details, but basically this is the tip of the spear of the military. It's a matkali unit, as it's called. And that's where I found myself leading up to October 7th of basically, what was that? 7 years, I guess, give or take, of training in this new form of a unit and learning all the expertise of basically it's a special mobility unit within this fire battalion. And that was our expertise, was everything to do with mobility, in combat, deep behind enemy lines, which is mainly just training leading up to the war, because we don't do what we call a kav in Israel. So we don't spend a month out of the year right. in a particular area and operate. We just get called up when war breaks out, essentially.
And specializing in driving?
specialized in mobility.
Mobility.
So it's mobility. It has, I'll put it like this, it's mobilizing troops, so getting the troops into the combat zone, switching them out, getting them what they need, if it's food, water, ammunition, you name it.
Wow.
If it's getting intel out of the combat zone and transferring it to the intel community to process intel, let's say, from the battlefield. It can be terrorists. So the transport of, like during the war, we transported hundreds of these terrorists out of the Gaza Strip. They had given up in the combat and got rounded up, and we basically transport them out, get them to due process here in Israel. It can be anything from that to a bunch of other different things and specialty secret squirrel kind of stuff that I can't really talk about. But that's to give a big picture of what we do.
What has it been like inside Gaza for you and your guys?
I would say for my team, it has been a better experience than a lot of the warfighters. Because a lot of the warfighters, I would say, you know, like the combat battalions I was a part of, you don't really have everyone on the same page, everyone shooting for excellence and training like your life depends on it, right, throughout the year. My team was like that. So when we got into the war, there wasn't like, oh shoot, what do we do? Oh shoot, I have to catch up on all the years that I didn't really focus on combatives, shooting, what have you, right? We're constantly training either with our reserve papers where we get orders to go train and we get funded by the IDF to do it, but we would also fund our own training outside of reserve duty, where we would meet up and we'd go to a shooting range and or we'd go to a shoot house and we would do close quarter combats and we would basically refine our skills on our own dime, right? So what that means is that once we got into the combat of what happened October 7th, we weren't like a lot of guys caught with your pants down, so to speak. We were basically squared away. So on the upside of that, it was a different experience, I think, than for a lot of guys, right? Who, and I'm talking about reservists. I'm not talking about the young guys who are already in the middle, post their basic training, and they're already fresh and you know, they're ready to go. So it's different, but it's once you get into reserves, you kind of get into a lull. You kind of get into
Makes sense.
You're more focused on your career, less on, you know, who cares about I just have to do my reserve duty, you know, like let's just get this over with and get back to focusing on my career. My team's not like that, you know, and so that I think was a big difference that I noticed by being around a lot of reservists. You could just see the difference. And they could see the difference. So there was a little bit of also some negative rub when they see our team, because people were actually a little bit, I think they were a little bit, they felt like a little like threatened, because they see like a group of guys who all act the same, look the same, and they're kind of like, who the heck are you guys? You know?
Yeah.
And then of course one of the nicknames we would get is the A-team. You know, here comes the A-team, you know, which is great because that's what I was shooting for my whole military career.
Yeah.
Was that's what I wanted to be a part of, is the most elite of the elite that the military will allow me to be a part of. And we really developed a very, very healthy ethic within our team and in our unit. And it's all thanks again to our lead commander, who's really, he's the head honcho of this whole team, and he's the one who helped recruit a lot of the guys, and also we knowing friends of friends, bringing in guys that, you know, it's not people that have to be there, which a lot of the units are like that.
Right.
We're all there because we want to be there.
What about like being inside of a combat zone, like inside of a war zone? Like what is that? What was that like for you? Like when you first got in or first saw like combat, like war?
So like I said, we felt squared away as far as our tactics and preparedness. So that aside, you still feel fear. You still feel the uncertainty of the mission I'm about to go into. Where's the enemy? What are the threats? And also, I would say, leading up to that, our first missions was just being in the chaos of October 7th, the aftermath, right? Because we got called up on the first day of the attack. We all showed up on and showed up in our where we needed to show up on base, and get collected. But it was also processing the horrors of what we saw of October 7th. The bodies, the cars that were charred, the devastation to Jewish communities, because it's like the war is now in our backyard.
Did you go straight down south?
Oh yeah. So we were one of the first reserve units that basically went into the areas where the terrorists had basically done all the horrors of what they did, right? So you got to see all the carnage of that. You got to see, I remember, for example, the one community we were in, some of the families decided to come shortly thereafter, right? Before basically before they were green-lighted to all come back to their homes. There were some that just insisted they're going to come back. And I think they also felt secure because our FOB, our forward operating post, was actually in a Jewish community, in a suburban community, right? And so I think they also felt the security of knowing the military's here versus October 7th, where is the military, and the devastation. So those who came first and insisted to come, even though it wasn't green lighted to fully come back yet to your homes, because we're still clearing terrorists. There's still terrorists running around in the areas, hiding out in homes and that kind of thing. And so we're actually clearing home by home still. And one of the families that came back, I remember the children were terrified when they saw us. And that really emotionally basically jarred you. It's like, here you come and you're a proud soldier, defender of your people.
Wow.
And this little child is looking at you as the bad guy because the bad guy dressed like us.
Yeah.
The bad guy looked like us. And here this kid, I could tell, was clinging onto their dad like a cat, you know. And the dad is trying to be all chill and cool, and he's come to us and goes, hey, I know you guys don't have showers where you're staying. Come to my home.
Yeah.
Please feel free to use my shower. My whole family is basically still not here yet. It's just me and my wife or whatever. And you know, please, you know, use our facilities and that kind of thing. And I remember just being like, you know, I feel so bad for this dad. Here his child is clinging onto him for dear life. And then I remember also hearing the child screaming at night from nightmares, because I have kids. And I know the difference between screaming because they're cranky and screaming because they're terrified. And you could tell this kid had been through and seen some nasty stuff. That really psychologically just put you in a bad headspace, I guess you could say. And then the very next first mission that we had after clearing areas and all that, and the aftermath, was collecting bodies. So a week after October 7th was our first body collection mission, where we went out into the fields of Be'eri, and which was still a combat zone. It was still threats from RPGs and sniper fire and all the different threats towards the soldiers. And we went into those open areas in the cloak of darkness and started locating bodies that had been laying out in the fields for a week, rotting. And so that, again, psychologically, the smell of death, that I think, unless anybody's ever smelt that, and in that kind of potency, you can't put words to how horribly that sticks to you. Mentally, psychologically, physically. You know, you have the smell of death all over you, basically. Because we would collect the bodies, put them in a collection, get them to the refrigerations trucks, but that was after you got them out of the open field.
Right.
So because we were at the end of this convoy, you get all that smell on you and everything. And again, that was just jarring. And so you're trying to recover from all of these emotional horrors as now the ground operations have started, right? Which was peaked with frustration of why is it taking so long for us to get in?
Yeah.
We have hostages in there. So a lot of my guys were basically, myself included, we're all climbing the walls of frustration of let us in already. What is the government waiting for, right?
I think the whole country was like that.
The whole country is like that. But you're the guy who knows that
Right.
you can get the job done.
Right.
And it's like every day that goes by is a diminishing chances for the hostages. And so all of that kind of peaked towards now we're going in. But then again, like I said, now you're also dealing with, okay, these are the threats, RPGs, sniping, ambushes, IEDs, all of this, and all that's going through your head. And it's also happening. You're getting shot at by RPGs, guys. It's not just RPGs. They have other rocket-propelled systems. I forget, cold nets, not cold nets. They have a name for it. It's a different system that they're using in Gaza. But basically all kinds of projectiles to take you out, or mortaring you, etc. And you're doing your mission, and the only way you can kind of get over all these threats, because they're happening, is just focus on the mission, focus on your skill sets, and knowing that there's a procedure for if this happens, if that happens, all the contingencies, and just stay focused on that. Don't think too much about death and what could happen, and just try to put that out of your mind and just stay focused on the mission to execute.
Wow. And everyone on your team is good. Everything okay? Wow.
Yeah. Thankfully, after all these operations that we've done both in Gaza and in Lebanon, and had a lot of close calls, thankfully nobody's been killed.
Yeah.
We've only sustained injuries from the missions themselves, that just you get injured from the operations themselves.
Wow.
So thankfully we don't have any losses. The one big hit, and the other emotional roller coaster, was when one of our teammates and one of my good friends, his brother had been killed in Gaza, who was a platoon commander, and he walked into an ambush with him and with his unit, and he and a few other guys ended up being killed in that ambush, and that was, of course, a very heavy and hard day. You're trying to comfort your brother in arms, who just lost his literal brother in combat, and and we were able to manage going to the funeral in the morning, and then coming back, doing operations at night.
Wow.
Back in Gaza, and trying to stay
Wow.
psychologically and emotionally focused, I guess you could say.
My goodness.
That was definitely one of the hardest days.
What are your thoughts about, the threat of, I guess, organized terrorism within Judea and Samaria, as well as, maybe let's just focus on Judea and Samaria.
Mm-hmm. I would say for me, Judea, Samaria, like most Israelis, is something that unless you experience it, you don't really understand it. There's a lot of misinformation, a lot of lack of education on the subject, right? Judea, Samaria is something you read on the headlines, and you read in the news. And the news, both in Israel and abroad, unfortunately, typically gives a slant and an angle on Judea, Samaria that isn't reflecting the reality at all. And I learned that the hard way during my military service, actually. The first time I ever ended up in Judea and Samaria, and this is being someone, like I said, who is a Zionist, who is pro the Jewish state and building the land and coming back to our homeland and so on, I was completely ignorant to Judea, Samaria. In my mind, it was settlers who are radicals and are unruly.
Wow.
Because that's how the media portrayed them.
Yeah.
And I went to the Jewish conversion course in the military, and my first Shabbat with the host family was hosted by one of the instructors in the course, who spoke to his community where he lived, which was the Yeshuv Eli community. And that's right smack dab in the heart of Judea, or right smack dab in the middle of Samaria, north of Jerusalem, and right next to the biblical site of Eli, of Shiloh, where the tabernacle stood. So again, these are biblical areas that I knew through my studies and reading the Bible, but because of the political spin of things on the media or in talks with our politicians, I was completely ignorant to the reality on the ground and how it really is. And so here I get hosted by these radicals, so-called, and I'm like blown away. Like my mind is basically having it's like a come to terms with, I think I've been completely lied to about this area. The host family were one of the most respectful, God-fearing people I've ever met in my life. The people there in general were sweet people, community living, talking, like they knew their neighbors. They, as they'd walk into the synagogue, and we'd go with them, because that was the idea, is that you live with them for that Sabbath. And so they're taking you to the synagogue for the prayers. You get to have the Sabbath meal in their home with their family and kids. And you're just seeing how everybody knows each other. They have communal living. They respect each other. In most cities in Israel, like Tel Aviv or Haifa, you don't know who your neighbor is.
Right.
You're kind of like a lot of Westerners. You live in your own little bubble. And it's like, I don't really know Joe Schmo across the street at all. Here, like I'm saying, in contrast, everybody knows everybody. Everybody's friends with everybody. Friends, yeah? I mean, again, not to give people this rosy idea that, there aren't conflicts, there aren't, arguments, but you could tell there's in a generalization, it's a communal, respectful, we're all here together, we all are building a community here, and you see that their motivation is, at least where I was in Eli, which is more of a religious community, their motivation is the biblical fulfillment of Jews coming back to their land, reestablishing the land, and that the land would bear forth its fruit and all the blessings of God that will come through that. And if anybody wants to deep dive on that, you can study the Rav Kook and his teachings on that, and those principles of the establishing the building of the land, and how that's a fulfillment of the mitzvot for the Jewish people. That's very important. A very important aspect of the mitzvah is the establishing of the land and the building of it. But then I discovered years later, after having more involvement and going into, let's say, Ariel, and then you see that you have completely secular people living there, and they're living there in a occupied area, so to speak, beyond the Green Line, because they want quality of life. They want not so expensive real estate as you have in Tel Aviv or Herzliya or wherever. You have much cheaper living. You have nature. You have an easy drive on Highway 5 to your workplace. And they're there because of, again, it's much easy life for me and my family. It's not an idealistic purpose why they're there. And that also puzzled me. I'm like, okay, so it's not just the folks that I first had my encounter with this area that are usually labeled as radicals by the media. You also have like literally secularists. I mean, they could care less about God. They're here just because it's a great place to live. I'm like, oh, so you have that too? Because again, the media portrayal is a lot of negativity. And you think, oh, it's Jews and Arabs that fight each other all the time. No, you have the Jews who are shopping from the Arab guy, right? And servicing them. And then you have also the Arabs who are working at the Jewish factory that was built by a Jewish entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And they're the workforce there, right? and or they themselves have their own entrepreneurial businesses. The Jews are coming there, and vice versa. So you're like, wait, so people aren't slaughtering each other like the media portrayal is? No, they're having respectful, neighborly living, and then at the same time, you have radicals from the Jewish side and you have radicals from the Arab side who will create those conflicts and will do things to each other, attack each other. Mostly, unfortunately, from the radical Islamic background, are going to try to kill Jews. And in retribution, Jews who had enough of being shot at, rocks thrown at, family members killed, they want retribution. So they'll go and do the worst of, maybe burn down those guys' olive orchard or whatever, at worst, typically, and or rough up and beat up one of the village guys where this terrorist attack came out of, right? But it doesn't usually lead or end in bloodshed from the Jewish provocateurs, right? And when I say bloodshed, I mean leads to murder. And so then you're like, okay, I mean, again, put yourself I start to put myself into their shoes. And I'm like, if I were this guy, yeah, who just had his wife murdered on this road that Israel paid for, Israel paved. The Palestinians did nothing for that road, not for the infrastructure, not for the anything, not the water, not the electricity. Everything Israel gives to the Palestinians. They build for them, they give for them, and these guys are attacking the Jewish people. And then you have a Jewish guy who basically has enough, and then he gets retribution back at whoever he feels is the one that's been targeting him. Makes sense. But then I ask myself, but what is causing the Arab guy, or the Palestinian, if you like, according to the how they want to call themselves, why is he attacking someone who's just driving on the highway or in a shop? Why are they stabbing this person to death? What's his cause? And then you realize, when you take a deeper dive, it's because they got radicalized. In the mosque that they go to, they get preaching that has been written by extremists, Muslim Brotherhood affiliates, who write up the script for the imam, who is part of their radicalized jihadist worldview, and they're pumping the minds of these young men, typically, with a radical Islamic jihadist worldview, which is essentially, Jews do not have a right to this land except for dhimmi. You can live here as a dhimmi, as a second-class citizen under Islamic rule, and that we can accept. But for Jews to be independent in this strip of land that is waqf, that is Islamic because of its past, that's not accepted. And that's essentially what you realize is the crux of all of these terrorist attacks is based off of people being radicalized who then carry out attacks, not because somebody necessarily hurt them, but because they've been brainwashed to believe that's the right thing to do. And then, of course, and you know, again, not to make everything so rosy and like, oh, it's just that. No, then you also have people who, because the IDF went into a search for terrorists in their community, and his brother gets killed in the crossfires of a gun battle that happens, and unfortunately, he's a victim, not necessarily a terrorist, but a victim of a terrorist that the IDF was coming for, and now that person wants to get retribution, and fair enough. Just like,
yeah,
you know, and then you start to see that, and you're like, wow, but the media and the politics, they spin things out into a different perspective and different narrative from giving you the actual, these are the stories, this is the underlining of these conflicts. They tell and portray a completely different story. They will claim that the reason why there is terrorism, why there is conflict in Israel is because of settlements. Settlements cause war. Settlements are the cause. But that's not true. Because most of the settlements are established on empty hilltops where Arabs never lived on, weren't interested in.
Do you think that full-on Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria would solve this issue?
Yes. It's two problems. The one is what I pointed out, which is the Islamic extremist worldview. So that's on the Muslim side, if you like. On the Israeli side, our problem is that we will not exercise Israel's sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. That our politicians won't take a decisive move to establish sovereignty. What that creates is a martial law status for anyone living in this territory of Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, if you like, right? What it means is you don't have policing like you do have in Tel Aviv, right? This guy parks where he shouldn't, he gets a ticket. Mm-hmm. You commit a crime, you're gonna get arrested, and you go through to see a judge and whatever, right? Here, it's basically controlled by the military, right? That's sent in to help defend against attacks and what have you. The Arabs living here, they're not citizens of the state of Israel, so they're in a martial law kind of reality, and therefore they don't have statuses, they can't vote, they can't be a part of Israeli society, what have you. They feel like, and rightfully so, like they're in a other state, in another world, especially under the PA, Palestinian-controlled area. And they're embittered because of the PA, which they have claimed. I've heard them in interviews where they were asked, what do you think of the PA? They say, oh, they're corrupt, they're horrible, they just take all of our money and they pay off all the elites and we get nothing. What do you think about Israel? We hate Israel. Why? Because Israel is occupying our land, So again, I get them because they don't live in Israel. They don't get to be part of like the Arabs who do live in Israel. And if you ask the Arab Israelis the same questions, and I've seen that, where it's not like they know they get fed answers. These are real straight conversations that you have. They'll say, no, of course we love Israel. Would you like to be under PA rule? They're like, heck no, absolutely not. Why? Because those guys are terrorists. Because those guys are corrupt, and we'd lose everything that we're enjoying right now under Israel. Really, under Israeli sovereignty, it means that it gives a status to the Arabs who are living there, and it means that you have actual rule of law. Now again, but that also means that it will cause a counter from the jihadist worldview, which is that Jews are not allowed to be sovereign here. So of course it will create, in my opinion, it will create a counter reaction, but I don't think that counter reaction will last very long. If things are managed in a way where basically the Palestinians living there start to realize what they will lose if they go back to going under the PA, which is in limbo, right? Stateless, rightless, etc.
So putting aside the politics and the statecraft and policies, and say Israel takes responsibility for everyone in its borders and actually claims its borders and grows up and decides its future, what are some benefits you think might come out of that? As well as, is there a win-win for both Arab and Jew?
I do think so, yeah. Because I'll give some examples. If you look at the Arabs living in Haifa, where I lived as a teenager, for example.
A lot of Arabs there.
A lot of Arabs. A lot of Arabs. You have Christian Arabs and you have Muslim Arabs, right? And then you have the Christian Arabs who don't like to be called Arabs, but they are part of the Armenian background, but basically they're from another people group. They're not necessarily Arab. So it's nuanced. But bottom line is they speak Arabic, they have Arab culture and so on. And typically what has happened before Israel had sovereignty in these areas, and it was under Islamic rule, what you had the Christian Arabs who lived as dhimmis and didn't really have it great, but it wasn't horrible. Same with Jews. It wasn't great, but it wasn't horrible, right? Depending on who was ruling and who was the head Muslim ruler at the time, depending on their mood, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because as dhimmi, it can be anything, and you're really at the mercy of whoever's the head Islamic ruler. But what I can tell you is that the Druze were persecuted. The Druze are some of the most hated people group in the Muslim Middle East. Because in Islam, because of the way their religion kind of formulated and they kind of offshoot and left Islam, it's like almost worse than Jews or Christians. And so what I do know is that the Druze under the Muslim rule, they were miserable. They had a lot of persecution. They were forced to live up in the highlands. And that's why most of the Druze, they live in northern Israel and they live up on the mountainous areas where they can defend themselves the best against Islamic persecution. When Israel became sovereign after 1948 here in this region, the Druze had a status. The Christians had a status. The Muslims had a status. Everybody benefited from freedom of religion, freedom of how you live your life, more or less, right? And just like any other country in the world, there are taxes, there are laws, but at the end of the day, you also have social care for all. Nobody asks you if you go to the hospital, what religion are you? What ethnicity are you?
Right.
You get health care equally for all. The same.
You're in the system.
You're in the system.
Yeah.
And so essentially overnight, no matter what people's religious statuses were beforehand and how they were treated based on that, nobody was mistreated because of that under Israeli law. Because that's unacceptable in Israel. And that's the reality also in Israel. That's the mindset.
Right.
Nobody in Israel feels that we need to persecute a particular people group or whatever because of that.
Yeah.
But under the Islamic rule, like I pointed out, that's the big issue. Under Islamic rule, it's unacceptable for Druze to have a status, for Jews to have a status, for Christians to have a status, other than dhimmi. That's what is essentially what the PA is fighting for, this pan-Arabic caliphate of a sort. Yeah, each one has a different who they feel should be the main Muslim ruler, but essentially that's what they're fighting for, and that's what they want. They want a region that is free from anyone who is not Muslim, and then next is who is not Muslim like us, right? And that's why you have, for example, in Syria, with the takeover of Julani, it's his Islamic worldview against the Alawites, and he's now going to slaughter them, but they're Muslim. And you're like, but why? Well, because they're different. They're not like us. And that's just the reality of the Middle East, and that's how it is. Israel's the exception of that. And that's also why Israel takes so much heat because of that from our neighbors. Because it's their worldview is that you can't have anything other than this. And that's what they're fighting for. What we're fighting for in Israel is we're fighting for equality. We're fighting for freedom for everybody. And that's a big difference.
First and foremost, I really appreciate your time. And before you head out, I do understand that you have a movie coming out about, the heart of Israel, which is the Temple Mount. Maybe you can explain a little bit about what it's about and how that came about.
Yeah, so we have a movie that's going to be coming out on Jerusalem Day on May 25th. And the focus of the film is actually to highlight the importance of the Temple Mount, which is at the very heart of the controversy of Judea, Samaria, of the West Bank. Because technically what people, I think, don't recognize and realize is that Jerusalem is actually at the very heart of that cutoff point. That's where the green line goes through.
Right.
And essentially what it does is it cuts off the biblical heart of the Jewish and Christian faith, which is Jerusalem. It cuts it off and it gives it to to those that might not manage this area in such a way that is respectful and honoring of all the different religions who share a history here. So in Jerusalem, you have a Jewish history, first and foremost, right? With King David, who established Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He built the temple, the first temple, through his son, Solomon, who basically executed David's plans of the replacement of the temporary place of the temple, which was in the tabernacle, that basically it moved around, right? When the children of Israel came into the land, the tabernacle moved around, and in the film we actually highlight that story. And it takes you through a lot of Samaria, it takes you a little bit through Judea. We go into Hebron, so we talk about the history of Hebron. We talk about the history of the first altar on the mountain of it's actually called the Mountain of Cursing. You have the Mountain of Blessing and the Mountain of Cursing, but essentially the children of Israel build the first altar there where they worship God through Joshua. And so it's called Joshua's altar. For those who want to Google it, they can check it out. But it's a very rich history that we basically highlight these stopping points of the children of Israel and the places of worship. Shiloh, where the temple or the tabernacle stood for 369 years, which then finally leads to Jerusalem and its final resting place. And so essentially what we do is we highlight these biblical areas and these areas that are also today contested through politics, what have you, but we do it through a cinematic way that basically highlights these areas to both Christian and Jews, but mainly our targeted audience is the Christian world that is, for the most part, ignorant to the importance of these areas in their Bible. I mean, they read about it, but they don't understand that it's actually talking about an area that is so-called contested, right? In their minds, these areas are in Israel, and it's, like they don't recognize when you're talking about giving sovereignty to the PA in, let's say, Samaria, you're cutting off Shiloh, right? Which to them is also important. The highway that Jesus walked when he went from Galilee to Jerusalem, right? Joseph's tomb. That's where you have Jacob's well. This is where Jesus has this encounter with the Samaritan woman. And he makes the big revelation to her where he actually talks about the importance of the Temple Mount. Because she says, we Samaritans believe that this is God's holy mountain because they have an alternate place to Jerusalem in the Samaritan tradition, which is what conflicted with the Jewish people in the Second Temple period. So he tells her, he says, woman, he says something like, you worship what you think you know, but we Jews, we worship what we know and what is true, which is that the temple in Jerusalem is God's holy mountain. And one day, you and all the world is going to worship God there. And he highlights that right there. So these are biblical areas where you have these important encounters and important stories that happen that we try to highlight through our film and connect the Christian audience to their history, which is connected with the Jewish history, to our history collectively. And that's kind of our goal with the film.
Interesting. Where's it going to be shown? Like, where can you see it?
You can go to IamIsraelFilm.com, I think it is. But if you just search I Am Israel, The Mountain of the King, this is the sequel to the first I Am Israel film that the Christian director David Kern had produced. And then he and I ran into each other, and we both collaborated on the sequel to that film, where we kind of continued this story, because in the I Am Israel film, the first film, it talks about Judea, Samaria, and it highlights that again to a Christian audience that is mostly ignorant to the actual locations and the places. And mainly it's actually also the tourist Ministry of Tourism in Israel that doesn't really take Christians there because of the conflict, because of the risks, because of all the the politics and whatever. But in reality, you can go there. You can see these places, and it's safe to go there. Contrary to, again, the media and how the stories are blown up on the news. And that was his goal, is to try to bring the Christians from his audience, right, to come and see these places that he got to see and experience, and was blown away. Like, why don't we come and see these places?
Right.
Why does the tours not take us here? And so that was his passion with the first film. And we kind of continued that with highlighting, again, the Temple Mount as kind of the focal point at the end of the film. You kind of just see like, wow, this is so important. God's house, the mountain of the king, right? Mount Zion. This is kind of the culmination of everything is here. And why? And so we try to basically highlight that in a very simple way, filmic way. And it's, in my opinion, it's one of the best Israel films that has been done in a very long time. And it highlights areas and shows it both in a cinematic way that hasn't been done before. So it's like we're kind of breaking new ground in this film. Because you have films about Israel,
right,
but nothing like this.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Very much looking forward to and it's available when?
On May 25th.
On the website?
Yep.
Okay,
you can already pre-order it, but it will be released for digital download on
Amazing.
May 25th. And people can also get on Blu-ray and all of that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.